Gotham did not sleep. It never had. The city breathed through its sewers and exhaled through its chimneys, a living creature made of concrete, rust, and old sins. Rain fell in slow, deliberate sheets, painting the streets in shades of black glass. Neon signs flickered behind curtains of fog, their colors bleeding into puddles that reflected a skyline too tall, too crooked, too tired to hold itself upright. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, not in alarm but in ritual, as though the city sang to itself to remember it was still alive. In the alleys, men moved without hurry. They wore the darkness like tailored coats. This was their hour, and they knew it. But something in the air had changed in recent weeks. The usual chaos had grown quieter, more coordinated. Weapons that should have been rusting in evidence lockers were suddenly appearing in the hands of foot soldiers. People were vanishing from the edges of the city, families reporting empty beds and unanswered phones. Gangs that had spent decades carving each other apart now shared cigarettes on the same corners, whispering the same name. The broker. No one had seen his face. Some said he wore the crest of the old families. A ghost of the Falcones or the Moronis returned to claim what was buried. Others swore he answered to something older, something that lived beneath Gotham's foundations, patient as stone. Whatever he was buying. Bodies, bullets, silence. And Gotham, always eager to sell itself, was happy to oblige. Far from the towers of glass and the empires of crime, a lone figure walked through the rain. His coat was soaked through, his shoulders low, his gait heavy with old wounds that refused to become memories. He did not know this city. He did not know the smell of its river, the sound of its trains, the shape of its skyline against the dying moon. He only knew that something had thrown him here, some tier in the world he did not understand, and that his body ached in the particular way it always did when the universe was about to ask something terrible of him. His name was Logan. He was tired. Tired in the way only men who cannot die grow tired. He had no interest in becoming anyone's savior tonight. He wanted a drink, a roof, and a stretch of quiet long enough to remember what quiet felt like. But Gotham had no such gifts to offer. His nose lifted slightly, catching something on the wind. Copper, fear, gunpowder still warm in its chamber. Blood, and a great deal of it, carried through the rain from somewhere close. He stopped in the middle of the street and closed his eyes. He could have kept walking. He had walked away before, from worse places, from louder screams. Survival had taught him that a man who tried to save everyone eventually saved no one, but his feet turned toward the scent anyway. The industrial district squatted at the edge of the river like a corpse the city had forgotten to bury. Warehouses leaned against one another, their windows shattered, their doors hanging on ruined hinges. Logan slipped inside the largest of them without a sound, moving through the shadows with the ease of something born to them. Inside, beneath a single swinging bulb, he found them. A half circle of armed men, their faces hidden behind cheap masks, their weapons drawn. Kneeling before them were the civilians, 6 of them, hands bound, mouths taped, eyes wide with the particular kind of terror that knew no rescue was coming. Among them was a boy, no more than 8, shivering so hard his small shoulders seemed to blur. Logan watched from the darkness. He told himself to leave. He told himself this was not his city, not his war, not his problem. He told himself many things, and none of them mattered. One of the masked men stepped forward and pressed the barrel of a rifle against the boy's forehead. The claws came without thought. They emerged from between his knuckles with a sound like a lock finally giving way. 3 long blades on each hand, wet with rain and gleaming under the sick yellow light. The masked men turned. For a moment, no one moved. Then one of them laughed, a short, nervous laugh, the kind men use when they do not yet understand what they are looking at. Logan did not laugh back. He crossed the room in a single breath. The first man fell before his rifle reached his shoulder. The second fired, and Logan let the bullets pass through him because it was faster than dodging. The third tried to run. He did not get far. There was no artistry in it, no choreography, no heroic pose held for an imagined audience. It was the work of a butcher who had once been a soldier and had learned, somewhere along the way, that mercy was a language spoken only after the room was quiet. When it was done, Logan stood among them, breathing slowly, the wounds in his chest already knitting themselves closed beneath his shirt. One of the masked men had crawled toward the door. Logan let him go. Every legend needed a witness. He cut the ropes from the civilians without speaking. The boy stared up at him, mouth open, eyes still wet. Logan did not offer comfort. He did not know how. He stepped out into the rain and looked up at the broken streetlight above him. On a rooftop across the street, half hidden in the mist, a shape stood motionless. A long black cape moved slightly in the wind. Neither man spoke. They simply watched one another, two predators measuring the weight of a new world. Then the rain closed between them, and Gotham held its breath. By morning, the story had already changed shape 3 times. It moved through the mouths of frightened men the way infection moves through a wound, warping with every retelling until the truth was only a distant relative of the rumor. In a smoke-stained pool hall on the east side, a man with trembling hands swore the stranger had eyes that glowed red. In a stripped warehouse near the docks, a foot soldier insisted the intruder had walked through gunfire, as though the bullets were merely rude questions he had chosen not to answer. In a diner off the highway, a survivor whispered that the creature was not human at all, but something older, something the city had at last provoked into waking. The gangs argued over him the way children argue over monsters. One family declared him a metahuman, some renegade experiment escaped from a government cell. Another claimed he was a mercenary sent by a rival syndicate, though none could name the rival. A third believed he was an immortal, an old thing wearing the borrowed face of a man, drawn to Gotham by the smell of its rot. With every hour the stranger grew larger in their minds, and larger still, until he could no longer fit inside any single explanation. In the belly of the city, behind walls of stone and steel, Batman watched the footage. He had already run the images through every database available to him. There were no matches, no fingerprints on file, no dental records that aligned, no conventional medical history in any system he could reach. The man in the warehouse existed the way a shadow existed, undeniable in the moment and impossible to prove afterward. What interested Batman was not what the stranger could do, but how he did it. There was no showmanship in the man's violence, no flourish, no cruelty for its own sake. He fought the way a soldier fought when the war had gone on too long, economically, without hesitation, without pleasure. Batman recognized that shape of restraint. It was the same shape his own restraint had learned to wear. He rewound the footage and studied one moment in particular. The stranger had allowed a bullet to strike him through the shoulder rather than move to avoid it. He had chosen the wound. Batman watched the small flinch, the almost imperceptible acceptance, and understood something few men would have understood. The stranger was not fearless. He was simply familiar with pain. Elsewhere, Logan was learning Gotham the only way he knew how, by walking into its worst rooms and asking its worst questions. He found the bar without needing to ask directions. Every city had one, and every one of them smelled the same, of stale beer and wet coats, and the sour breath of men who had run out of places to hide. He sat at the far end of the counter with his back to the wall. The bartender, a heavy man with kind eyes and a broken nose, looked at him for a long moment before pouring him something dark. Logan asked about the disappearances. He asked about the weapons. He asked about the coins. The bartender wiped the same glass 3 times. "Gotham does not like strangers," he said at last, without looking up. "Neither do I," Logan answered. They came for him before he finished the drink. 4 of them, then 6, then 8, drifting in through the front door and the back with the quiet coordination of men who had done this before. Logan set the glass down carefully. He did not want to break it. He liked the weight of it. The fight lasted less than a minute. He did not use the claws. He did not need to. He broke a wrist, dislocated a shoulder, cracked a jaw against the corner of a table, and pinned the last man against the wall by his collar. "Where," Logan asked, "are they taking the people?" The man wept. He did not know. He only knew the coin. He fumbled it out of his pocket and dropped it into Logan's palm. It was black, heavier than it looked, and stamped with the outline of a wolf. Logan turned it over between his fingers. He had seen a great many symbols in a great many wars, and he had learned that the ones drawn in blood were rarely accidents. This one had been chosen for a reason. He slipped it into his coat and stepped out into the rain. The rooftop shadow was waiting for him 3 streets later. Batman dropped from a fire escape without a sound and landed between Logan and the alley's mouth. Up close he was larger than the rumors suggested, and quieter. His voice, when it came, was a low instrument tuned for interrogation. "Who sent you?" "Nobody," Logan said. "Try again." "Nobody. I don't do errands." They circled each other slowly. Batman moved first, because he always moved first, and because he needed to know what the man in front of him could survive. The fight was not the brawl the underworld would later imagine. It was a careful conversation conducted with fists and elbows, and the occasional flash of a blade against armored plating. Batman used the alley the way a chess player uses a board, drawing Logan into corners, testing his reactions, measuring the length of his reach. Logan answered with a directness that was almost polite, striking hard, absorbing what he could not avoid, giving away nothing. Neither man won. Neither man lost. They separated at the same moment, breathing hard, blood on both of them. Though only one of them was already healing, Batman saw it. The cut along Logan's cheekbone was closing as he watched, the skin knitting itself back into a smooth line as though the wound had been a suggestion the body politely declined. "Who sent you?" Batman said again, quieter now. "Nobody," Logan repeated. "And whoever they are, they should be more worried about themselves than about me." He walked past Batman without looking back. Batman did not follow. He watched the stranger vanish into the rain, and for the first time in a long time, he was not entirely certain what he had just seen. The coin sat on the workbench of a small pawn shop in the Narrows, catching the low light of a desk lamp as an old man with steady hands turned it beneath a jeweler's loop. Logan stood over him, arms folded, watching the old man's expression change from curiosity to unease, and finally to a wary silence. The pawnbroker set the coin down as though it had grown warm. He would not say who had made it. He would not say who carried them. He would only say that men who owned such coins did not spend them, and that men who found such coins on the ground rarely lived long enough to spend them either. Logan thanked him with a nod and left before the old man could change his mind about being seen with such a customer. Above him, the city moved through its ordinary hours as though nothing had shifted. Below him, in the tunnels the ordinary hours never touched, an entirely different Gotham was preparing itself for war. The broker's operation had never been about weapons. Weapons were currency. Weapons were the noise beneath which the real work continued. Deep beneath the streets, in laboratories that predated the current century, his people had been collecting the discarded miracles of a dozen shuttered projects, the half-finished dreams of scientists whose funding had run dry and whose data had been quietly bought at auction. Nerve agents that behaved like memories, serums that rewrote muscle, machinery that stitched flesh back to bone with the patience of a spider. The broker did not want to sell these things. He wanted to combine them. He wanted to make men who could not be killed. And then the stranger had walked into a warehouse and made a mockery of every experiment his laboratories had ever produced. The broker sat in his private chamber watching the same footage Batman had studied, though from a very different angle. He watched the wounds close. He watched the man walk away from bullets that should have ended 100 lives. He did not see a threat. He saw a resource. The broker's voice, when he gave the order, was almost gentle. He wanted the stranger alive. He would pay more for him alive than any single job in the history of the city. Word moved through Gotham the way fire moves through dry grass. By dusk, every faction with a soldier and a rifle had heard the number. By midnight, every faction with a scrap of ambition was hunting. For the first time in years, the criminals of Gotham feared something other than Batman. Logan felt the shift before he understood it. He was walking through a crowded market in the Bowery when the smells around him began to change. Ordinary sweat gave way to the particular kind of sweat that only ever came from men who were about to try something they were not certain they could finish. He heard the click of a safety being disengaged 3 stalls away. He heard the almost imperceptible hush of a crowd being quietly emptied by unseen hands. He heard a heartbeat directly behind him, too fast for a shopper. He was moving before the first shot was fired. The chase carried him across half the city. He ran along the rooftops when the rooftops were the only path, dropped through skylights when the skylights were faster, and cut through subway tunnels when the subways offered darkness. The men chasing him were not amateurs. They coordinated by radio. They cut off streets with vehicles. They tried, more than once, to funnel him into open spaces where snipers waited, and still they could not hold him. The city, he realized, was a gift to a creature like him. Its walls hid too many corridors. Its rain hid too many scents. Its noise hid too many sounds. He could hear a shell being chambered on a rooftop 2 blocks away. He could smell the particular cologne of the man who had followed him from the market. He could track a heartbeat through concrete. Gotham, for all its ugliness, was the perfect forest for the animal it had accidentally invited inside. He killed no one that night, though he could have. He broke bones. He shattered scopes. He left men groaning on fire escapes and gasping in alleys. When the chase finally exhausted itself in the ruins of an old theater, he stood among the wreckage of the last ambush and listened to the city inhale around him. It was there, beneath the collapsed balcony of the theater, that he found her. She was one of the civilians from the warehouse. A woman, perhaps 30, with a bandage still crusted along her temple and eyes that had seen too much sleep since the night he had cut her ropes. She had not gone home. She had been afraid to. She had been trying to find him. She told him what she had not told the police. She told him about the trucks that came in the middle of the night. She told him about the sound of doors closing beneath the streets. She told him that the people who disappeared were not being killed. They were being taken somewhere below, somewhere warm. She had heard the low hum of machines through the walls of her cell. She had heard other voices, some pleading, some praying, some simply gone quiet, in a way that voices should not be able to go quiet. Logan listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he did not thank her. He asked her to draw the route she remembered. She did, on the back of a torn playbill, with the steady hand of a woman who had spent every night since her rescue rehearsing the map in her head so she would not lose it. He was folding the paper into his coat when Batman stepped out of the shadow of the theater's ruined stage. They did not fight this time. There was a long silence between them, of the sort that grown men use when neither is prepared to concede a first sentence. Batman spoke first. He told Logan what his own investigation had uncovered. Logan told Batman what the coin had bought him and what the woman had drawn. The two accounts, held side by side, made the same shape. "There is a way in," Batman said. "I have been mapping it for weeks." "I don't take orders," Logan said. "I wasn't asking you to." Logan looked at him for a long time. The rain had followed them into the theater through the broken roof, and it fell between them like a curtain. Then Logan nodded once, a small and reluctant motion, and the two of them stepped down together into the dark. The tunnels beneath Gotham were older than the city that had inherited them. Some had been dug by hopeful engineers a century before, meant for trains that were never built and gas lines that were never lit. Others had been carved out later by men who wished to move goods without paying taxes, and by men who wished to move bodies without paying attention. And beneath all of these, deeper still, ran passages whose original purpose no living archivist could name, stone corridors that felt as though they had been waiting patiently for the city above to fall so they could take their turn. Batman moved through them the way a man moves through the rooms of his own house. Logan moved through them the way a wolf moves through a forest it does not trust. Neither spoke because both understood that sound carried through stone in ways that light did not. The first sign that they had reached the correct place was the smell, antiseptic, old blood, the chemical tang of preservatives that were never meant to be used on the living. Logan stopped in the middle of the corridor and closed his eyes. Batman glanced back, and something in Logan's face made him wait without pressing. "I know this smell," Logan said at last, and did not explain. They found the door hidden behind a false wall, and behind the door they found the facility. It sprawled beneath Gotham like a second city, low-ceilinged and fluorescent, its walls the color of hospital tile grown yellow with time. There were laboratories with tables scarred by restraints. There were surgical bays whose drains had not been washed in years. There were rows of tall glass cylinders filled with a pale, milky fluid, and inside some of them there were shapes, and some of the shapes were moving, and some of them were watching. Logan walked past the cylinders without looking at them. Batman walked past them the way a man walks past a graveyard he does not intend to leave flowers at. They found a records room next, and in it a wall of thin metal drawers, each labeled with a name that was not a name so much as a designation. Subject 7, Subject 22, Subject 49. Batman opened one drawer, then another, then a third, and closed each one more slowly than the last. The files inside described experiments in regenerative biology. The broker's people had been trying, for years, to reproduce what nature had reproduced only once. They had been trying to grow a healing factor. None of the subjects had lived. Or rather, none of them had lived in the sense that a merciful language would use the word. They had continued to breathe, in cages, without minds behind their eyes, until the researchers had grown bored of them and moved on to the next. Logan read one file and then closed it and did not read another. Batman watched him carefully. He knew, without needing to be told, that they had walked into the ghost of some older wound Logan carried and had no intention of naming. He did not ask. He did not need to. What he said instead was quiet and simple. "We shut this down." Logan nodded once. They moved together after that in a rhythm neither of them had rehearsed. Batman disabled cameras. Logan opened cells. The prisoners were fewer than they had feared and greater than they had hoped. Some were the missing people from the woman's list. Others were strangers. All of them wept when the doors opened, and none of them ran until Logan told them, quietly, which corridor would take them up. The alarm came a moment later. It was not the sort of alarm designed for a police response. It was the sort of alarm designed to release something. The cylinders along the far wall began to drain. What came out of them did not look, at first, like men. Their proportions were wrong. Their skin had the pale sheen of something grown rather than born. Their eyes, when they opened, did not focus on anything a mind could hold. But their strength was very real, and their hunger, whatever it was for, was very real. And there were 9 of them, and only 2 of Batman and Logan. The fight that followed was neither elegant nor merciful. Batman used the geometry of the facility, drawing the creatures into narrow corridors where their numbers meant nothing. He used flash charges and sonic bursts, and the exhausted breath of a man who had trained his whole life for opponents almost, but not quite, this bad. Logan used himself. He stepped into the middle of them because he could survive it, and he let them tear at him because it kept them off Batman. And every time they knocked him down, he stood back up faster than seemed reasonable. And every time they opened him, he closed himself again while their teeth were still red. At the end of it, there was only breathing, and the low drip of fluid from broken glass, and the sound of Batman reloading a device Logan did not recognize. They found the broker in the deepest chamber, sitting behind a desk as though he had been expecting them and had only ordered his tea a moment before. He was not what either of them had imagined. He was small, gray, tired, with the exhausted face of a middle manager who had discovered too late that his career had a ceiling made of skulls. "You should not have come," he said. Batman asked him a question. The broker answered it. He asked him another. The broker answered that one too, with a shrug of resignation, as though he had been waiting for years to say these things aloud to someone who could not use them against him. He told them that his laboratories were not the whole of the operation. He told them that he had been paid by someone above him, someone he had never met, and that the true buyers of everything he had built were preparing Gotham for something worse than either of them understood. "They are preparing the city," he said, "for a war it does not yet know it is fighting." Before he could tell them who the buyers were, the chamber shook. A device hidden in the ceiling activated with the calm sigh of a machine that had been waiting a very long time to do exactly one thing. Batman was already moving. Logan grabbed the broker by the collar and dragged him toward the door. They did not make it out with him. The broker died in Logan's arms with his final breath curled around a smile that made no sense. "You should have let Gotham," he whispered, "have its monster." The facility collapsed behind them as they climbed toward the rain. The collapse of the underground facility should have been a victory. Instead, it opened a door. Gotham did not mourn the broker. It did not even, for the most part, notice that he had ever existed. But the criminal families felt his absence the way a chandelier feels the absence of a nail. Within days, the delicate balance he had maintained across the underworld snapped, and every gang that had shared cigarettes on the same corner remembered, with fresh violence, why they had once carved each other apart. The streets grew louder. The morgues grew fuller. The city began to bleed from 100 small wounds at once. Batman moved through it the way he had moved through a dozen previous wars, tirelessly, methodically, taking down one crew after another. Logan moved through it differently. He did not spread himself across the city. He waited. He listened. He read the pattern beneath the noise, and he understood, sooner than Batman did, that the chaos was not chaos at all. Something was orchestrating it. The name came first as a rumor, then as a warning, and finally as a fact. The Black Court. They had been beneath Gotham longer than the current century, longer than the current century's grandfathers. They did not run brothels or gambling halls. They ran judges. They ran police captains and prosecutors and city councilors. They owned the rooms in which the city's decisions were made before the decisions were made. Ordinary criminals feared Batman because Batman was the only man who could reach them. The Black Court feared no one because no one had ever been allowed to see them, until now. The broker had been one of their instruments, and the destruction of his facility had cost them a great deal. More than that, it had exposed them. The stranger with the claws and the vigilante with the cape had, together, done what neither of them alone had ever quite managed. They had made the Black Court visible to itself. The Council of the Black Court met in a room whose location Batman had spent a decade trying to find and had never located. Their leader, a thin man whose face was so ordinary it functioned almost as a disguise, listened to his lieutenants describe the events of the past week without interrupting. When they were finished, he said only one thing. "The vigilante we understand," he said. "The other one is a variable." He ordered the elimination of both. The assassins the Black Court sent were unlike the men Logan had fought before. They did not carry rifles. They did not shout. They carried syringes and small bright knives, and they moved in silence. And they knew things about him that no one in this city should have known. The first came for him in an alley behind a laundromat. She spoke his name before she attacked, and the name was not Logan. It was a name he had not answered to in a very long time, a name that belonged to a room in Canada with a metal table and men in white coats. She whispered it as though she had rehearsed. She meant for it to unbalance him. It did. He killed her without meaning to. He came back to himself with her body in his hands and his claws wet, and Batman standing in the alley's mouth watching him. "She knew things she should not have known," Logan said, before Batman could speak. "I know," Batman said. That was the beginning of the fracture between them. It did not appear all at once. It grew, quietly, over a series of nights. The Black Court sent more assassins, and each one carried more knowledge, and each one whispered more of Logan's past into the rain before he could stop them. Weapon X. The names of men he had failed. The names of women he had loved and lost and been unable to remember without a bottle in his hand. The Black Court had reached, somehow, into a history that had happened in another universe. And they had pulled his private wounds up to the surface and painted them across the walls of Gotham. He began to lose sleep. He began to lose the small margin of restraint that had always separated the soldier from the animal. Batman watched it happen. He tried, in his own careful way, to hold the line. He asked Logan to stand down. He asked Logan to let him handle the interrogations. He asked Logan, on one particular night, to let one Black Court lieutenant live long enough to give up the names of 3 others. Logan almost did not. The lieutenant hung from a fire escape by his collar, 10 stories above a courtyard, and Logan's free hand held 3 blades a hair's breadth from the man's throat. Batman stood at the other end of the fire escape, cape motionless in the still air, and spoke without moving. "If we become them," he said, "they win." "You think," Logan said, "they care about winning." That was the sentence. That was the fracture made audible. Both men heard it. Neither man could take it back. Logan pulled the blades away. He set the lieutenant down. He did not thank Batman, and Batman did not thank him. Something between them had broken quietly, the way a rib breaks when a man does not realize he has been holding his breath too long. The Black Court launched its true attack the following night. They struck at every criminal district simultaneously. It was not a purge. It was a message. They killed their own, publicly in the streets, the low-ranking foot soldiers of every rival family, and they did it with the calm precision of a chef trimming fat. Gotham woke to find its underworld halved, and its citizens realized, for the first time, that there had always been something larger than the gangs sitting quietly above the gangs. Batman ran toward the civilians. He always did. He organized shelters. He guided evacuations. He held the line at 3 different bridges before dawn. Logan ran the other way. He did not tell Batman where he was going. Batman did not ask. Both men knew Batman had chosen the city. Logan had chosen the hunt. There was no argument left to have about it. Logan disappeared into the tunnels below the Bowery with a fresh coin in his pocket and a fresh scent in his nose. He was not angry exactly, though he looked angry. He was something colder than angry. He had found, at last, the trail he had been waiting for. It led downward, and it led alone, and he intended to follow it whether the man in the cape approved of him or not. Logan let them take him. He walked into the trap the way a wolf walks into a snare it has already measured. He had spent 3 nights letting the Black Court's watchers follow him, letting them memorize his routes, letting them believe that they were the hunters and he was the exhausted quarry. On the 4th night he chose a warehouse with only one exit, drank slowly enough to look drunk, and allowed the syringe to find his neck without turning. He fell to his knees when they expected him to fall. He closed his eyes when they expected him to close them. He let them carry him down. They stripped him and chained him to a table with restraints that would have held anything the ordinary world had ever produced. They sedated him at intervals, though the sedative wore off faster each time. They spoke around him as though he were furniture. They made the mistake almost all of Logan's captors had ever made. They believed that a body which could be pinned to a table was a mind that could be pinned to a table. He learned everything in 3 days. He learned that the Black Court's leader was a man who was not afraid of dying, which was a rarer sort of enemy than most, and who was terrified of dying badly, which was more common than he pretended. He learned that the Black Court's true obsession was not power exactly, but permanence. They had watched empires rise and fall from beneath the streets of Gotham, and they had decided long ago that the only sensible course was to build an empire that could not be killed. Immortality had become their theology. He learned, worst of all, that they had not invented the idea of him. They had found rumors of him, fragments, scattered across a continent that was not this continent, in files that had come to them by routes even they were unwilling to describe. Someone, somewhere in some other world adjacent to this one, had encountered the shape of Logan's existence and had left behind pages that eventually drifted, by paths no honest historian could trace, into the Black Court's archive. They had built their laboratories in imitation of a legend they did not fully believe, and when the legend had walked into their city, they had recognized him with the shock of children discovering that the monster under the bed had a mailing address. Their final subject was ready. They wheeled the tank into the chamber where Logan was chained, because they wanted him to see. Inside the tank floated a man, or what had once been a man, now enlarged past ordinary proportion, threaded through with metal fibers, his chest rising and falling to the slow rhythm of a machine that had learned to imitate a heart. The synthetic regeneration system had been grafted into him at the spine. His skin, when they woke him, glowed faintly along the seams. He was called, by his makers, only the answer. He was Logan's opposite in almost every way. Where Logan's healing was patient, the answer's was hungry. Where Logan's mind lived inside his wounds, the answer's mind had been carved out to make room for the machine. He opened his eyes and did not know what he was looking at. He opened his mouth and did not remember any of the words a mother had once taught him. The Black Court freed Logan from the table because they wanted to see what happened when their weapon met its inspiration. The fight nearly killed him. The answer was faster than Logan had believed anything of that size could be, and stronger than Logan's body had been asked to survive in a long time. It struck him through walls. It threw him down flights of stairs. It bit into his shoulder and would not release him until Logan pushed a claw through the roof of its mouth and up into the socket of its eye. The wound closed almost before Logan's claw withdrew. The answer did not scream. It only kept coming. They tore each other apart across 3 levels of the Black Court's stronghold. They broke pillars. They cracked floors. Logan felt bones snap and reset while he was still moving on them. The answer felt nothing because the makers had taken feeling from him along with his memory, and that, Logan understood at last, was the thing that would let him win. He stopped fighting the body. He began, instead, to speak to the man buried under it. He said the sorts of things one says to a wounded animal that used to be a person. He said them quietly, in the small pauses between blows. He said a name he did not know, and asked the creature to remember it. He said the word mother, and asked the creature to remember her. He said the word home, and did not name any particular one, because he did not know where the man in the tank had once been from, only that everyone had once been from somewhere. The answer slowed. The answer stopped. The answer sank to its knees in the middle of the ruined chamber and, for the first time since the machine had been sewn into its spine, wept without knowing why. Logan sat down next to it. He did not touch it. He did not need to. He waited. When the man beneath the weapon finally spoke, he said only a single word, and it was neither Logan's language nor the Black Court's. It was old and soft and probably a name. Logan told him he was free. The Black Court's leader was already fleeing by then, through corridors he had prepared for exactly this sort of failure. Logan let him go for the length of a corridor, and then he did not. He followed. He caught the man at the door of the deepest chamber, the one no lieutenant had ever been allowed to enter, and he pinned him against the wall with a single hand around his throat. Behind them, in the dark of the chamber, something old was beginning to hum. Logan felt it before he saw it. It was not sound exactly. It was the sensation of being recognized. Something inside the chamber knew he was there, in the way a magnet knows another magnet is close. His healing factor pulsed against his skin in answer, unbidden, as though the two of them were finishing a conversation begun long before his birth. The Black Court's leader smiled through the pressure of Logan's hand. "You feel it," he whispered. "It has been waiting for you." Logan did not answer. He was staring past him into the dark of the chamber at the shape that had begun, very slowly, to glow. Batman arrived at the chamber the way he arrived at every place in Gotham that mattered. Without warning, without invitation, without any noise the guards were permitted to hear before it was too late. He came through a ventilation shaft the Black Court had believed sealed, and he came alone because he had followed the wreckage of Logan's passage through the stronghold and had decided that whatever waited at the end of it did not require a committee. He stepped into the chamber with a batarang already drawn and stopped in the doorway because what he saw there did not fit into any category his training had prepared for him. The chamber was enormous. It had been carved into a natural cave in the bedrock beneath the city, and its walls were older than any language Gotham currently spoke. Symbols were etched into the stone that Batman recognized from 3 different dead civilizations, none of which had known one another. And at the center of the chamber, on a plinth carved into the living rock, sat the artifact. It was not, at first glance, impressive. It looked like a stone, a dark stone, pitted and rough, no larger than a man's chest, held in a cage of black metal that had been added, plainly, in the last few decades by hands who understood only the smallest fraction of what they were holding. But the stone was warm. Batman could feel it from the doorway, and it was singing without sound, a note that only a certain sort of animal could hear. Logan was on his knees before it. The Black Court's leader stood behind him, one hand at Logan's neck, the other on a control panel Batman had never seen the design of. Cables ran from the panel to the plinth, and from the plinth into Logan's back. The healing factor Batman had watched close bullet wounds in seconds was pouring, visibly, out of Logan and into the stone. The Black Court's leader was smiling. Batman decided in that instant that he would not be smiling much longer. He moved. The next few minutes were among the ugliest of his career. The Black Court's leader was not a fighter, but he had prepared this chamber to defend itself. The floor produced weapons. The walls produced men. Batman fought his way through them the way a surgeon works through a cancer, without flourish, without pause, without any illusion that he could rescue anyone but the one man on the plinth. He took 3 wounds he would not be able to explain to Alfred, and gave several more that no one would ever explain to anyone. He reached Logan. He reached him too late to disconnect the cables cleanly, and too early to allow the process to complete. Logan looked up at him with eyes that were not entirely present and said, through teeth that were clenched against a pain Batman could not measure, only one thing: let it finish. Batman shook his head. Logan pressed the words out again, more clearly. Let it finish. I can shut it down from inside. Batman understood then why Logan had allowed the Black Court to bring him this far. He had known, from the moment the assassins had begun whispering his oldest names in the rain, that there was a thing beneath Gotham that had been calling to him. He had walked toward it deliberately. He had let the enemy build his cage because the cage was the only door. Batman took a step back. He hated it. He took the step anyway. The stone drank. Logan's body arched against the cables and did not scream because whatever the stone was doing to him was too deep for screaming. His healing factor accelerated past every limit it had ever been asked to endure. His flesh knitted and unknitted 1,000 times a second. His memory, which had always been the wound the healing could not close, tore open like a curtain in a storm. He saw everything. He saw the tables of Weapon X and the men who had stood at those tables. He saw the wars he had walked out of and the funerals he had not been able to attend. He saw the faces of the women he had loved, one after another, and the terrible mathematics by which each of them had outlived, or failed to outlive, the years he could not spend. He saw children he had not been able to save, and children he had. He saw the small, quiet moments between the atrocities, the ones the world had never noticed, the ones he had thought he had forgotten. He saw, at the center of all of it, a truth he had spent a lifetime refusing. His healing was not a curse. His memory was not a curse. His body was not a curse. Only his refusal to accept what he had been given had ever been the curse. The Black Court's leader appeared beside him, half real, half something the stone had drawn out of him. "Accept it," the whispering thing said. "No more pain, no more aging, no more losing. Stay here forever." Logan considered it. It would be a lie to say he did not. He considered it for exactly one long breath, and inside that breath he saw the whole shape of the offer and understood why it was worthless. "Living forever," he said, "is not the same as living." He reached inside himself, into the place the stone had opened, and he tore the connection out from the other side. The chamber convulsed. The artifact cracked first along one seam and then along a dozen, and the light inside it spilled out across the stone and burned into the walls the names of the civilizations that had known it before. The cage of black metal snapped like a dry branch. The plinth shattered. The Black Court's leader collapsed to his knees, all his careful smiles gone, and for the first time since he had been a child, he looked afraid. Batman was already lifting Logan off the plinth. Logan could barely stand. His body had been asked to do more than any body should ever be asked to do, and it was, for once, honest with him about the cost. The cavern began to collapse. Batman turned toward the corridor. Logan grabbed his arm and shook his head. "Go," he said. "I will slow it down." Batman looked at him for a long moment. He had lost people in caves before, in caves under this same city, and he had promised himself, many years ago, that he would never lose another. He did not answer Logan with words. He simply pulled Logan's arm over his shoulder and began, slowly, to walk. They climbed together through fire and falling stone toward the rain. They emerged into the rain to find that Gotham had already begun the war for them. The collapse of the chamber sent a tremor through the whole city, deep enough to shake bottles from shelves in the east and shatter windows in the west. The tremor was felt by every criminal who had ever paid a coin to the Black Court, and every criminal understood, with the sudden clarity that only comes to men who have staked their futures on the wrong horse, that their patrons were no longer able to protect them. Fear made them dangerous. Debt made them desperate. Within an hour, the surviving lieutenants of every family had put out the same call. The city was theirs to take before anyone remembered to take it back. Barricades went up in the Bowery. Fires bloomed along the docks. Convoys of mercenaries poured across the bridges from the mainland, hired at rates the criminal families had been quietly saving for exactly this contingency. The police tried for a while to hold their precincts. Some succeeded, many did not. By dawn, Gotham had become something it had not been in a generation. Not a city with a crime problem, a city at open war. Batman rose to meet it because Batman had always risen to meet it. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He moved from crisis to crisis with the terrible economy of a man who had been rehearsing this exact night for 20 years without knowing it. He held the hospitals. He held the shelters. He held the bridges the police had lost, and then the bridges the police had never had. Wherever a civilian stood between a bullet and a doorway, Batman stood in front of them. Logan rose too, though slower. His body had been pushed past a threshold no body was designed to survive, and the healing that came back to him after the artifact was not quite the healing he had left with. It was faster. It was hungrier. It was, in a way he did not entirely trust, more alive. He tested it against the first crew he found looting a pharmacy on Kane Street, and when he walked out of the pharmacy, the crew did not follow. He tested it again on a rooftop, and again in an alley. And by the third test, he understood what Batman had understood from the beginning. They were, for this one night, the two most dangerous men in the city. They fought as a pair without ever quite meeting. Batman coordinated. Logan hunted. Batman's voice came through a small piece of metal Logan had, at some point, allowed to be pressed against his ear, and it told him, without editorializing, where the worst threats had gathered. Logan removed them. He did not ask Batman why he was giving him the addresses. He did not need to. He understood that Batman was choosing, on this one night, to trust him with the parts of the city he could not personally hold. They saved a great many lives. They failed to save some. The war did not care which was which. The Black Court's leader, who had not died in the chamber because men like him rarely died in the first collapse of anything, emerged after midnight. He had wrapped himself in an experimental regeneration harness his own laboratories had prepared, in secret, against exactly this sort of eventuality. It was not as elegant as the machine he had built for the answer, but it was more than a man ought to have been permitted. His skin knit itself in real time. His wounds closed like closing eyes. He walked into the plaza in front of Gotham's cathedral, and he began, systematically, to kill anyone in a uniform. Batman met him there. Logan met him there. The three of them fought in the rain beneath the cathedral's shadow for what felt, to everyone watching, like a very long time. The Black Court's leader was not a soldier, and did not need to be. His harness fed him strength faster than he could waste it. Batman's fists broke against him. Logan's claws opened him, and the openings sealed themselves before the blood could reach the pavement. He laughed, for the first and last time in his ordered life, because he had understood at last what his organization had spent generations pursuing, and he had understood that he was the vessel of it. "I have one," he said, and he was not entirely wrong. Logan looked at Batman. Batman looked at Logan. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing to say that could be usefully said. They stopped trying to defeat him. They started trying, instead, to disassemble him. Batman took the harness apart the way an engineer takes apart a bomb, one wire at a time, ducking blows he could not entirely avoid, tearing out modules while Logan drew the leader's attention with his body. Logan let himself be hit. He let himself be broken. He got up. He got up again. He got up a third time and a fourth and a 10th, and each time he stood, he was closer to the panel at the leader's spine. And each time he stood, Batman was one fewer wire away from finishing. The last cable came free with a small, unremarkable click. The regeneration stopped. The Black Court's leader stared down at his own hand and watched, for the first time in decades, a small cut on his knuckle refuse to close. He looked up at Batman. He looked up at Logan. He said one word, which was please, and it was not clear which of them he was addressing. Batman broke his jaw and then his ribs and then his knees methodically without pleasure and left him alive on the wet stones of the plaza for the police to collect. Logan watched. He did not intervene. He did not, this time, argue about what mercy meant. The war did not end all at once. Wars never do. But the Black Court's leader was taken. His lieutenants scattered. The mercenaries, who had been paid up front and not paid nearly enough to die for it, began, one by one, to disappear back across the bridges. By the middle of the following day, Gotham had exhaled. Batman and Logan sat on the steps of the cathedral in the rain. Neither had energy left to stand. Batman reached into a compartment on his belt and drew out a small device Logan did not recognize. He looked at it for a long moment and then closed his hand around it. "The portal you came through," Batman said. "It is gone. I checked." Logan nodded slowly. "Then I guess," Batman said, "Gotham has one more problem." Logan looked out across the ruined plaza at the fires being put out, at the survivors being helped to their feet, at the city that had almost lost itself and had, somehow, not quite lost itself. "Gotham," he said, "already has enough problems." Batman almost smiled. He rose without saying anything else and disappeared into the mist. Logan stayed on the steps a while longer. The rain did not stop. It never did. The city rebuilt itself the way the city always rebuilt itself, slowly, unevenly, and without gratitude. Shopkeepers swept broken glass from their doorways in the mornings. Contractors argued with insurers in the afternoons. Journalists wrote long, careful pieces about the night of the tremor that failed entirely to explain the tremor. The mayor made speeches. The commissioner made arrests. Life, which had been briefly and violently interrupted, returned to its ordinary channels, because life in Gotham had never been given the option of doing anything else. Beneath the surface of the ordinary, though, something had shifted. The Black Court did not exist anymore. Its lieutenants had scattered to cities that would not have them. Its files, which Batman had spent a week quietly extracting from the ruins of its strongholds, were being turned over to prosecutors in careful, unhurried batches, one indictment at a time. The families that had once paid the black cord its tithes now paid nothing to anyone. And the vacuum where the cord had sat was, for the first time in living memory, a real vacuum, empty of hands. Into that emptiness two legends grew. The first was the one Gotham had always known. The Bat continued to be seen on rooftops, in alleys, in the small hours when the police were changing shifts. Nothing about that legend had altered. It had only, perhaps, sharpened. The second was newer. Criminals whispered about a second shadow. A man without a cape, a man with claws, a man who did not seem particularly interested in headlines and did not seem particularly interested in mercy either, though he offered it, sometimes, to people who were not too far gone. He did not appear in the wealthy districts. He did not appear on television. He appeared always in the places where the police had given up going. A basement full of trafficked women in the East End. A warehouse where a chemist was cooking something that would have killed 100 children. A parking garage where a man with a hostage discovered too late that the concrete pillar beside him was not a pillar. Every criminal in Gotham learned, quickly, what the sound of the claws meant. Most of them lived long enough to teach it to the next one. Logan did not live in the streets. He found a workshop above an old auto repair on a quiet block in the Narrows, and he rented it from an owner who had questions and had, wisely, learned not to ask them. He fixed the roof himself. He put in a bed. He read, for the first time in decades, without a bottle at his elbow. He learned the names of the neighbors who left him food on his doorstep because they had heard, from somewhere, that he was the reason their grandson had come home from the docks alive. He did not accept the food at first. He grew slowly to accept it. He did not accept the friendships. He grew slowly to accept those too. One night, near the end of a long autumn, Batman came to see him. He did not come through the door. He came through the window, of course, because it was the only appropriate way for a man in that costume to arrive anywhere. He sat down on the small wooden chair Logan had built with his own hands the week before, and he set a device on the table between them. It was small and it hummed, and it displayed a single symbol that Logan had not seen since the night the world had thrown him here. The dimensional signature, Batman said. I have been tracking it. It is not gone. It has drifted. If we act now, I believe I can open it long enough for you to step through it. Logan looked at the device. He did not touch it. He looked at Batman, and he looked at the device again, and he looked out the window at the rain that had never really stopped falling since the night he had arrived. You trying to get rid of me, he said at last. No, Batman said. There was a pause between them, and the pause was longer than either of them was in the habit of allowing. Then Batman said the sentence he had come there to say. I am giving you a choice. Logan understood, without having to think about it, how heavy that sentence was. He had lived a great many lives in a great many rooms, and he had noticed over the years that in almost none of those rooms had he ever been given a choice. Weapon X had chosen what his bones would be made of. His wars had chosen where his feet would go. His enemies had chosen what his hands would do. And even his friends, when he had had them, had chosen mostly what they needed from him. He had never in his long memory been offered a door and told that he could take it or not, and that either answer would be honored. He sat with the offer for a long time. Batman did not press. Batman never pressed. At last, Logan reached across the table and turned the device off. Batman nodded once, without expression, and stood. He paused at the window before he left. He did not say goodbye. He did not need to. He stepped out onto the fire escape and was gone. Logan sat alone in the small quiet of his workshop until the rain began to lighten. Then he stood, put on his coat, and went out into the streets. Somewhere in the Narrows, 3 men were dragging a 4th into an alley. Logan turned into the alley behind them without hurrying. One of them heard something, a small metallic sound, and turned. Who the hell are you? The man said. Logan looked at him. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth, no more than that. The first honest smile his face had made in a very long time. You really do not want to know, he said. Above them, on a distant rooftop, Gotham's oldest legend paused for a single beat in his patrol, listened to the small violence resolving itself several blocks away, and moved on. The city had its Bat. The city had its Wolverine. The darkness had somewhere new to be afraid of.